Hello and welcome everyone to the first LANS Community Sync. Very glad to have these many attendees. Hopefully people attend these on a regular basis. So yeah, I'm Prashant. I'm working with Chanshan here on the DevRel side of LANSDB, but we also have many other members from the LANSDB team here on the call, including Jack and Will and Shonwu and the open source community you're familiar with. So just to lay out the agenda for this sort of call, basically this is an informal setting where we would like to have people communicate verbally, ideally, because we want to hear from people who are using the LANS format, who are building on top of LANS, and who are potentially lacking features or want to point out issues that the team here can actually look into. So I believe I think we've shared the document with everyone, right? We have the community doc shared. But just to highlight what we are doing today, so we'll very quickly throw a spotlight on a few of the things that have happened in the last couple of weeks since the new year began. First and foremost, we have the LANS DuckDB extension. That's a very exciting development. I'm sure you've seen some announcements about this. Basically, you can run DuckDB as a query engine on top of the LANS format. And then there's also another development on the Lakehouse side. The Polaris integration via the LANS namespace has come out. We just wrote a blog on this a few days ago, and the docs for this are available on the lans.org site. And the same for the DuckDB extension as well. We have the documentation page on lans.org in the integration section. And then the other ongoing big thing that's happening here is Hugging Face datasets. So we are basically making LANS a supported format on Hugging Face. And you'll see that in a few short days that we are going to be releasing some announcements on this, how you can access Hugging Face datasets via LANS using the HF/specifier as shown here. We'll release more documentation and material on this so you can learn more about what you can do with it. And then I won't go through each and every one of these PRs, but there have been some pretty interesting PRs. I know there's a lot of folks here on the call who are individually interested in certain new features that have gone in. So we'd love for you to maybe raise your hand and talk about some of these things in our discussion section. But in a nutshell, some of these involve the SQL updates and the geo-indexing updates, including this R3 index that went in recently. There's a lot of development going on the blob v2 API for LANS, and this is still ongoing. There's still more optimizations and improvements being done, but you can see some of the PRs here that have already gone in. And then, a lot more functionality on the JSON side. There are performance improvements as well for FTS, HNSW. So all of those are always ongoing. If there's any specific things that you notice regarding features and performance that's not up to standard, please raise your hand and let us know. And then I think I'll leave it to some of the others here, maybe Jack, to talk about the next big topic, which is the upcoming release of the 2.00 format, 2.0.0 format of LANS, the SDK. And then, we can discuss some of the blockers that are remaining to make it go in, but also hear from the community as well on this. So maybe we can start with that and then lead into the discussion section for individual topics. Do you want to maybe talk about the 2.0?
Actually, keep sharing.
Yeah. Oh, you want to keep sharing? Okay, yeah, I can do
that. And for the release, I think we do want to cut 2.0.0 pretty soon. And I see, well, there's one blocker for the index name, right? Are we close to merge that?
Yeah, I think I need to make one change to it, and then I think we'll be about ready to merge that.
Okay.
If I can merge that later.
Okay. Oh, I see. Yeah. Actually, I had a comment about the name. I don't know if we have resolved that for the colon space dot. Do we think we can use the backcode one, or do you think it's not necessary?
I can add the escaping like you were suggesting.
I see. Sounds good.
I'll do that.
And I guess for the other comment for not conflicts, that probably requires a stack change, right? Because we probably need to add another field in the create index, and that can be a separate thing.
Yeah, I think we could do that in a follow-up.
Yeah, we can do that. Do we see any other blocking issues before we release 2.0 for everyone here?
Yeah, I was going to ask if there's anyone else in the community who have potential things to talk about on this.
Yeah, I was looking through, I didn't see any other PRs that had breaking changes that were pending. So if anyone knows of one that I don't know about, please speak up. And then if there's any bugs that people have noticed where we have PRs that we could get in before, that would also be relevant.
Yeah, there's one draft I was still having for just refactoring the whole storage options path, because currently I previously added the storage options provider to dynamically populate storage options, and I have a whole refactoring on that so that we can get the latest one. But I don't think that needs to be necessary in 2.0. It would be nice, so I will try, but it doesn't need to be blocking.
Which PR is that specifically?
Let me see. I need to find my own view. Sorry, my network is pretty slow. I guess I'll paste afterwards. We don't need to.
Sure, yeah, I just wanted to make sure we have that in the notes.
Okay, so could we summarize what the next steps are, assuming this the blocker PR is addressed? What's the time frame in which we progress with the release cycle?
Yep.
Yeah, I think once that is merged, we will
Okay.
cut the release, and then people can start to test and vote.
Okay.
And it, because this is a major version, it will take 5 days.
Cool. So yeah, we're looking sometime in the next week, basically, that people can begin testing.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I think we can open up the discussion topics now. We have a few items listed here, but it looks like, yeah, anyone who has more items to discuss, please bring them up and potentially add them here. Do we want to go top to bottom, Jack, on this?
Yeah, I guess whoever wrote this can speak up.
Yeah, so let's have.
Yeah. So I put this up. This is sort of a concept that we're exploring. Basically, this came out of when we build things like binary packages for sort of Python and even Java. We sort of have to build with everything, and they can't sort of install things separately. And that means that if you want the Jieba or the Lundera tokenizers, that can add quite a bit to the binary size. And so we were looking at exploring if we can change those to be plugins. And so there's a PR links there that proposes an API, a C API, for a tokenizer plugin. And then this sort of design proposal sort of specs out like how it might work.
Does somebody have a question?
Will this enable our user to use CJK like from Jieba?
What is CJK?
Yeah, Chinese, Japanese, and Korean.
Yeah, that's the intention. I think right now we already have both Lundera and Jieba as like compiler flags. So they exist under conditional compilation. And so what this would do is remove them from conditional compilation and instead make them so there are additional dependencies you can install and dynamically load.
Nice.
I think this is probably a pattern we'll want to follow elsewhere as well as we start to build out more plugins.
Yeah, we've discussed it at various points, thinking about like wanting plugins for other things, you know, so like index types or maybe encodings or maybe something else. So this would be sort of the first example of that. Yeah, and I think there's some details in the design proposal that probably need to be fleshed out more. And so I think like some things we need to think about is like, how do we describe what those plugins are? And what is the behavior if those plugins are missing? Is there like a versioning scheme for those plugins? And I think it's not really a concern we want to have now, but eventually when you have plugins, you get to the point where you want to figure out how do you distribute those plugins. So like, I think like DuckDB, for example, has an extension registry, and they have a sort of a system for building and publishing those and maintaining and testing those. So it can get pretty elaborate. I think this for now would sort of set it up so that you could install them sort of separately, and we can release them as like Python packages or whatever sort of precompiled binaries.
Go ahead, Jack.
Just for my lack of knowledge for the stable C interface, and I know it works for Python, but would it work for the Java binding?
I'd assume so, because basically all you need is some way to wrap a C library in a package that you can install, and then from that library get the path to the dynamic library.
Yeah, you would need to make a like a Java, a small little Java package. So it would be like if this was like the CJK tokenizers or something, you could have a CJ, Lance-CJK in Python, install that, it would work. Java would be the same kind of thing. You would need to add to your Maven file Lance.CJK. And inside that CJK would be some JNI code. And then the C half of that JNI code would handle all of the translation. As long as the types aren't too exotic, they should marshal across the boundaries just fine. Yeah, like what? Can you open up the header file real quick, or is it big?
Oh, it's not too big. If you want to open it.
Sorry, which one is the header file here?
In the draft PR.
Oh yeah.
You go to the files changed, and there's just one. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, scroll down a little.
Maybe I can open the whole file. Maybe you're right. The diff is easier to see.
Oh yeah, all that stuff is very straightforward. So you can map that to Java really easy. Yeah, okay. Maybe not as yeah. It'll work. It'll be doable.
Okay. I think probably the next steps, we'll probably keep it open for discussion and get it to a place where we're happy in terms of the sort of spec on like how you use the plugins. And we'll put out a vote and eventually be able to merge that PR. And once we have that merged, we can really test it out. And especially, I think, want to make sure that there's no performance regressions versus using the sort of compiled in versions of like Lindar and Java. Once we establish that, then I think we can clean up and remove the old versions with the compiler flags. Yeah.
Cool. All right, so I think that topic, yeah, go ahead. Kevin had a point here.
I just saw on the thread that there's someone called out the size of the Python binding. I think I ran into this before too, where depending, you can specify some release configs, and it makes your binding a lot smaller. So you can give that a try if that's of concern.
Thanks. Yeah, I think we use, we do disable the debug and enable stripping. I think we don't currently do size optimization on the bindings. We currently, I think, still have it at level 3, but
yeah, for us it was like an 80% drop or something ridiculous. So it's worth it to take a look.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments on the FTS tokenizers? All right, I think we can go to the next one, the table format design proposal, I guess.
Yeah, this is also for me. This is a quick design proposal that I put up. I'd like to open a vote for it soon because I think it's fairly straightforward. But basically, the idea is, do we want to change the index metadata message in the proto file to also include a list of files that are part of the index? Right now, we just sort of create a directory for the index. But by creating a list of files, one of the benefits is that we can immediately figure out how big that index is on disk. And then the second benefit we can get is that we can sort of skip the initial head call to find the footer of the file, and that can reduce cold read performance on indexes. I already have a PR up that prototypes this. I haven't sort of measured the performance improvement, but I can do that soon. But if there's no concerns about it, I think I'll probably open a vote on this later today or tomorrow.
Are those string paths relative or absolute?
Sorry, which string? Oh, these, yeah.
They'll be relative to the directory.
I see. And that's a common convention for Lance. Is that everything just relative to the directory?
Or it's relative. So like we already have a requirement that for a given index, all of its files exist under its like we create a directory that has a UUID as a name, and it's a requirement that all the files for that index are under that directory.
Gotcha, makes sense.
So I think it makes sense to have it be relative to that directory.
There's already a base ID for the when we did the multi-base feature for Lance, we added the base ID in the index metadata. So all the files of the index can have a different base location. So that is still fine. So we don't need. I guess we don't need another override here.
Yeah, because if you wanted to have it in a different location, you would provide, a different base URI, and so that in the full path would be constructed by taking, I think, the base URI that's for the index, and then plus I think like underscore indices plus the UUID, and then plus whatever that string path there is. It's a good question. I might write that out explicitly.
I guess quick question from my side on like a change like this. Is it considered a breaking change, or like how does that process go?
This, I think, actually I haven't defined in here what the behavior is if this is missing, but I think this is not necessarily a breaking change. It's not a breaking change in terms of protobuf. And then I think we can have defined behavior when this isn't present. And then that's fine. So for example, like we just, if you're requesting statistics about the index, we can just say file size is unknown. Or you could even make an API to to explicitly list that directory and grab the sizes. Yeah, and so I don't know. I think we can have sensible behaviors if this is missing, basically. And I think maybe I'll add there that when index files is empty, this should be interpreted as missing information.
Thanks. And like Proto also does a lot of that heavy lifting for you, right? With like regards to evolution.
Yeah, exactly. Because it is from a prototype perspective, it's totally backwards compatible. More just how should this be interpreted? That's the part we also want to make sure is backwards compatible. Yeah. Okay. So I might add a few more details based on the questions here, and then I'll sort of open a vote tomorrow.
Sounds good. Looks like there's consensus on that. Yeah, I want to look at the next one here. I believe this is related to.
Yeah.
This
isn't really not discussing this PR itself, but more I had a question as far as like what changes to the format need a vote. I think on some level our community guidelines say like every change to the format needs a vote, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
So you're saying do adding new data types require a vote?
Yeah. Or updating to the wall spec, for example. Jack?
Just to clarify on the wall spec, I think I kind of merged that because I was working with what's his name, Hen, and we spent quite a lot of effort to updating the information to the latest. But then I realized actually we need a vote, so I moved that to I had an experimental title in the top. So my plan is to vote that after we run through a few more iterations. So I think that definitely needs a vote. For the data types, that's actually one area I think we have been not super clear even in the spec itself. My impression is that we might want to say clearly, for example, we support all the what list of core arrow types and then that means all the extensions that also use those types are by default supported, but some arrow types are not supported, and then when we support that, we can say this is a vote.
Is anyone else having GitHub issues, or is it just me?
It's not down, it's just slow.
In my case, it looks like it's down. Okay.
Well, I mean, the page still shows up. Doesn't give you a 500. But yeah, no, I have the same issue as
Oh, everyone does? Okay.
What was the last thing you were saying, Jack, about the data types? You were saying basically like say like, hey, we support all these arrow types except for these as exceptions? Or something different?
I think because we are mostly matching the arrow types, right? And maybe one way is we can say we support these arrow types, like give a list. So once we support more, like for example, in that PR, we can then do a vote to say, okay, we are extending support to additional types.
Yeah. Okay. So sort of maybe bottom line is you're saying adding new data types definitely requires a vote.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right.
And what I was saying, one more thing was, for example, for the geotypes, because they are arrow extension types, but then they resolve to the types we actually support. And in that case, I don't think that needs an explicit vote because they are just resolving to the types we support.
That makes sense.
Yeah, if it makes sense, the extensions don't. I think part of like one of the deciding factors is whether or not, so we have a definition of like our data types as like strings, and I think we need to define like what string corresponds to what data type in our protobuf. And so is it not a protobuf change in a literal sense, but a protobuf change in the sense of like what that field means.
But even like the input and output is always the arrow types. So
yeah.
And we go from the field metadata. But I mean, we don't support all arrow types right now either. Like you don't support the string view types, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I think extending which arrow types we support would be more significant and require a vote, because then you need to make sure that the clients and the tools, like maybe Node doesn't have support for the view types, so then we have to at least consider the fact that we'd be breaking compatibility there.
Yeah, that's true.
Whereas like the extension types, yeah, they can always just smuggle through.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think I'm satisfied with those answers. It seems pretty clear that we do want to vote. I think I do. I'm also probably going to add some documentation on the actual schema spec, so that we actually have something to change spec-wise in that PR. Okay.
Cool.
We can go on to the next topic.
Yeah, so the Lance context here, I believe that was this one. Yeah. I think this was opened by Benan. Benan, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah,
Awesome. Yeah.
I proposed this sub-project last night. So from the feature perspective, from the end user perspective, it's more like something to support the agentic memory, short-term memory or long-term memory, or even knowledge to the multi-agent application, something like a cursor, like a Cloud Code. The user may have some backend files. They may put image, may put a PDF, or maybe in our case, in Uber, the user may put some data frames into the context. So we need something high performance database or something to keep this kind of context. Also, because we need to do some verification, we need to do some debugging. So we also need this kind of database can be somehow got versioned. Sometimes we can fork a branch, or maybe later we can merge. Yeah, as I mentioned, we need it to support the multi-modality data in the context. Yeah, that's from the feature or the user perspective. From the infrastructure perspective, this project is more like a connector or driver from a vector DB like Lance to the multi-agent or what can I say? The multi-agent or the AI application, something like a long chain, long graph, or Core AI. So this kind of multi-agent framework can just use this driver or this connector to consume Lance or Lance DB as the storage, no matter the short-term or long-term storage.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you can take a look at the API design. It's quite simple. I think that's very close to the current multi-agent framework. Mostly they just relying on a context data structure, but underneath it is still Lance. But on top of it, it provides something like it's like a key value store, but it's not just that. And the multi-agent framework or application can just consume it. Yeah, that's the basic rough idea and the design. Maybe the API I will change in the future, but the idea is just something like that. Yeah. So
a question regarding the naming, isn't this more aligned with memory? I mean, context is just like the passage of data, but then technically this is like a form of persistent memory, right?
Here's the thing. Yes, I think that the last memory is also a good name for sure. I'm also struggling about this too. I think if we name it memory, it's more like our feature looks like our feature is more focused on the storage of the data structure.
Okay.
We were talking about the context, which may have some implications, something about the context engineering, something like the versioning, like the make fork a branch and merge, or maybe we can do some compress, index, this kind of thing.
Got it.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Oh, I think there's also a question asking about why we make it as a sub-project of Flask. It's a good question. I'm also struggling about that, to be honest. I'm just thinking in this way. If I contribute this one to something like a long chain or CoreAI, it can be a one part of this kind of AI framework, or maybe I can make it a separate project. But I think the community and or I think the maintainer of this project will be very, very different. For this project, I still believe there will be a lot of native optimization. We may have a deep coupling, or we may make some modification or change some behavior for us to support maybe some new data type, or to support some new type of index. So I highly recommend the last DB, or we can say the last community, can maintain this kind of project, because we have more expert in this area. Because this project, it's not just something like an application, it's still infra. So there's a lot, how to say, more difficult or more native change we need in this project. So I still want this project to work closely with the live community rather than the application side.
So my summary of this, Benan, is that you're saying the feature requests for this are more tied to the storage layer and less tied to the agentic layer. So it makes sense to have the framework integrated more on the storage side.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, that's a really good one. I'm also struggling about that for a while last night.
Yeah, it seems like there are some upvotes already. So yeah, I guess like this is already ongoing, Benan. Is this already been like some implementation exists?
Yes, there's already some implementation running inside Uber, but it's not fully rolled out. It's more like alpha. We just do the demo actually yesterday, but our team thinks that will be a good contribution to the open source. But most of them can be somehow extract and to have something like a separate project. Yeah. But we still need some work to extract the code and just make it as a separate abstraction layer and contribute to the open source.
Okay. Yeah, I think that this makes sense to the people on this call as well. And we can always async communicate this as you go along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I would highlight, this is a voting thread, and we do need 3 + 1 votes to create a sub-project.
Okay.
All right. So is that all about the context, Benan? Can we go on to the next one?
Yes.
Awesome. So I think Haocheng, you had this point about MVP PR for.
Yeah. So right now I'm working mainly with Wes and Jack on the MVP for column stats. The goal is when people use the dataset API to write the length data, for each fragment file, the column stats will be collected and baked into the file itself as a global buffer into the metadata. When the compaction operation is conducted, and it will collect all these stats and create a separate length file, which will store the source of truth for the column stats for the whole table. It's just the first phase. After that, people can iterate on if this thing should be done automatically per write, or you can add more column stats like mean, the shortest string, whatever people want. But the PR was actually being reviewed right now. I expect I need at least a few iterations to go through the existing implementation. Yeah. But this thing, all the new features will be defaulted off. We'll only enable this when most of people here are comfortable. Maybe that thing also needs a vote.
Hi, I have a question according to compatibility. Will this affect our 5 version? Should it be included in our 2.2 5 version, or is this not related?
So when you say compatibility, it's with the lens format version?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it will not affect the file version.
Yeah, so Weston's confirming that in the chat as well.
Yeah, we discussed it before.
Got it. Thank you.
So just so I'm clear, there's a design doc as well, and this is also actively being reviewed right now, right?
It's not reviewed yet. I've only shared it with a few folks first. I think once we all sign off, I will share the link to the discussion thread. Yeah, because this thing is in progress while we are working on the PR.
We could probably share it early so that people can discuss it while it's in progress.
Okay, I will link the PR and the doc to the discussion thread.
I think it's far enough along that we don't have to worry that there's going to be massive changes to it as we figure things out. And so it's in a good place, I think, for wider. I think we should always err on the side of releasing design to discussion earlier rather than later, even if there's some chance that we might refactor or change our mind as we go through implementation.
Cool. I will go through the doc again and share the doc.
So are there any questions from others in the community on this one? Right. So it looks like our discussion agenda is complete. Are there any other closing thoughts? Any other like upcoming things to discuss? All right. Looks like it's not. So I think the next steps are hopefully get the blocking PRs done and begin the voting process for Lance Format 2.0 release. And then, yeah, hopefully a lot of these features are available and ongoing developments beyond that. So I think we can wrap up this session early if there's no more comments. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining. And we're planning to do this at a regular cadence, just so that we have this verbal component to it. Putting faces to people's names and hearing their words is much more valuable than just seeing their chats on Discord sometimes. So yeah, please attend these whenever you can, and we'll continue making announcements on Discord as well as other social channels. Thanks, everyone.
Sorry. I was driving.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, so do we know, like, sorry, I was driving, so I couldn't look at the screen.
Yeah.
So are we only voting on the Lens 2.0, or is there also the Bayonets PR that needs to be moved, voted? And then does Hutchins thing needs to be reviewed and voted too? Is it just one voting issue?
There's many. There's at least
So
6.
The way I understand it is that we vote for the release of 2.0 first, and then the other votes go on in parallel. They don't need to go into 2.0 release, right, Will?
Yeah, at least for my that's true.
So yeah, ongoing multiple votes basically.
Okay. I'm good.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great. So I think now we're officially done. I think that's like we covered the agenda. So yeah, we'll be in touch on socials, and yeah, see you at the next one. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Bye.
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 Bye.